Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely profound exploration of resilience, education, and systemic change. We're unpacking a fascinating piece of research titled Navigating Barriers and Enablers to Academic Success for Students with Disabilities at the University of Gondar, Ethiopia. It's a powerful journey detailing the fight against systemic exclusion and the absolute life-altering impact of empowerment.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of what we're talking about today, we have to start with this staggering contrast: 3%. In Ethiopia, roughly 17.6% of the total population. To put that in perspective, that's about 15 million people live with disabilities. Yet, of the millions of children with disabilities in the country, only an estimated 3% actually attend school. This massive gap isn't just a statistical anomaly, right? It represents millions of lives systematically excluded from the classroom. And this vividly illustrates the visceral, lived reality behind that 3% statistic. This is a direct quote from a student researcher recalling their primary school experience. For many of these students, literally just getting to the school building is a monumental physical challenge. Without basic mobility aids, students are forced to navigate hilly, rocky, muddy landscapes by crawling on their hands and knees. It's a really stark reminder that accessibility isn't just about ramps or elevators. In many places, it's about the fundamental human dignity of being able to travel to learn.
But the physical barriers, they're really only half the story. The social barriers are often much worse. Just listen to this quote: "God took the legs of the snake, knowing his heart." This was actually said by a community member to one of the students. It highlights an intense, culturally rooted stigma where disability is frequently viewed as a divine punishment for past sins. Imagine being a child and facing antagonists who hold this deeply prejudiced view. This is the suffocating social atmosphere these students are breathing every single day.
So that brings us to Section 1, the reality of exclusion, looking specifically at these systemic barriers.
Researchers used Bronfener's bioecological model to map out these layered barriers. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. The crucial point here is that discrimination doesn't just happen in a vacuum on an individual level. It's layered. It starts with the individual's self-concept, radiating out to the microsystem, which in Ethiopia's deeply collectivist culture includes extended family and neighbors who have a massive say in a child's upbringing. Then it scales all the way up to the macrosystem, encompassing pervasive social norms and political systems. The exclusion is literally woven into the fabric of daily life.
Now, to understand this deeply ingrained exclusion, the research team did something brilliant. They used participatory action research, or PAR. Basically, this means the students with disabilities weren't just studied under a microscope, they were the actual researchers. They helped design the modules, conducted the interviews, and co-authored the findings. It is a direct pushback against the infantilization these students constantly face. It perfectly embodies the motto, "Nothing about us without us."
Which leads us directly into Section 2, the weight of barriers, specifically those brutal early hurdles.
The combination of hurdles these students carry is almost unimaginable. We've talked about the physical obstacles, but add to that massive technological gaps. In primary and secondary school, things like Braille, voice recorders, or computers are virtually non-existent. Then layer on extreme poverty. To survive and pay for school, students reported selling lottery tickets, begging, eating discarded food, and even sleeping in cemeteries. All of this while facing profound ostracization from their own families and communities who frequently try to hide them away or insist they belong only in church education, not secular schools.
So what is the psychological toll of all this weight? Researchers call it self-concept erosion. When your family hides you, when your community calls you a burden, and your teachers refuse to accommodate you, you begin to believe them. Students spoke of isolating themselves, feeling hopeless, and internalizing the idea that they were simply unable to learn. They were completely trapped in a dark cycle of self-stigmatization.
But there is a turning point. Section 3, finding the threshold.
How on earth do you break out of a cycle of hopelessness? Through a threshold facilitator. This is an absolutely crucial concept in the research. A threshold facilitator is a pivotal person, maybe a supportive aunt, a dedicated teacher, a mentor, who steps in, provides emancipation from societal oppression, and helps the student cross the symbolic threshold into education. They're the catalyst that sparks a brand new cycle of self-worth and capability.
I absolutely love this quote because it illustrates just how life-altering these threshold facilitators really are. One student recalled, "I had teachers who were like family. The house front was 30 bare, and my teachers were used to pay it." Just think about that for a second. Teachers going well beyond their professional duties, paying rent, taking students to the capital for medical treatment, or simply providing the moral support that their own families wouldn't. In fact, 5 out of the 12 primary participants in this study explicitly credited their very survival in the education system to a dedicated teacher.
Now this next part is fascinating. Section 4, the power of positive revenge.
Positive revenge is actually a term coined by one of the student researchers. It describes this intense, fiery motivation to succeed academically, not just for oneself, but to spite the societal doubt and outright demonstrate their capability to those who abuse them. It's basically taking all that systemic rejection and turning it into high-octane fuel for resilience.
By defying expectations, these students radically transform their communities. One student told a story about sending money home to his supportive mother, but intentionally routing the call through the mobile phone of his abusive stepfather just to prove a point. He said it gave him untold happiness. Another student noted how community members who once berated his father for sending him to school now actually point to him as a role model. Through academic success, they don't just change their own self-concept, they force society to rewrite its prejudices. This journey eventually leads them to higher education, specifically the University of Gondar, where we see a really complex dynamic. UOG hosts the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program, which provides incredible support. Stipends, laptops, personal assistance, it's life-changing financial stability. However, it inadvertently creates a two-tiered system. Non-funded scholars still struggle immensely with a lack of Braille and resources. Furthermore, non-funded students reported facing institutional discrimination, with university staff sometimes unfairly questioning their competence compared to the funded scholars.
So, how do the students respond to these institutional flaws? You might think they'd turn on each other. Actually, scratch that, it's the exact opposite. Funded and non-funded students bridge the gap, sharing laptops, pooling stipends, and physically helping one another navigate the campus. As one student beautifully put it, I move in a wheelchair, and a blind student pushes the steering wheel. I guide him with directions. I love it. They have built a profoundly warm, collaborative community founded on mutual survival and empathy.
All right, wrapping things up. Section 5, Achieving True Inclusion and the Actionable Takeaways.
So what does this all mean for policymakers? The researchers distilled their findings into 4 absolutely crucial pillars for systemic change. First, early intervention, getting children with disabilities into regular schools on time to prevent self-stigmatization from taking root. Second, the means of life, providing sustained funding so students aren't literally starving or sleeping in cemeteries while trying to study. Third, accessibility tools, stopping the guesswork and actually providing the specific devices students ask for. And finally, anti-infantilization, centering the voices of students in every single policy decision made about them.
And that brings us to the core lesson of this entire explainer. When we look at education and policy, we have to ask ourselves, are we building systems for students with disabilities, or are we building systems with them? The students at the University of Gondar have proven that when they are given a seat at the table, their resilience and insight can transform not just their own lives, but the entire societal fabric around them.